Hello and welcome to the Life Sketches channel. My name is Clara. I'm a 20-year-old girl with long blonde hair, slim, and with a body that can be called flawless. I was an extremely introverted girl until the moment that changed my life. The reason I am sending you the story I am going to tell you today with this blood is to lighten the burden of a secret that changed me and left me in a situation where I don't know what to do now. This is not a love story. It's a story of emotions with unclear boundaries, of feelings that are dragged to a point of no return, knowing that they are wrong. In telling this, I expect to be judged, but maybe there is someone else who feels what I feel. It all started when my mother got married. After years of being alone, she met a man named Jack. He was her second chance. The mistake was her biggest chance in life. But for me, everything was much more complicated. Jack was distant at first. He didn't seem to care much about me, at least not around my mom. But one thing I noticed was that when we were alone, his gaze changed. Small, subtle touches that were hard to notice, but made me feel something deep inside. Long silences. It started when I once thought he was watching me sleep, but that was just an assumption, until my mom went out of town for a few days, and those assumptions took on another dimension. And that's when it happened. Jack and I were alone in the same house while my mom was away, and that's when something started to change inside me. I felt a strange tension being alone with him, and then there was a moment when I was sleeping by the pool, and that's when it all went to the point of no return. For the first time in my life, I found myself in the middle of such a big change. When my mom married Jack, everything happened so fast. I woke up one morning, and at the breakfast table, I thought everything was the same as before. Then my mom put her ring on Jack's finger and everything changed. A new house, a new life, a new father figure. The first time I saw Jack, I averted my eyes. He had broad shoulders, slightly unkempt, but distinctively combed black hair, blue eyes, and stern features that always looked like he was in control. His mere presence changed the mood in the room. The strange thing was that instead of making me uneasy, this change made me feel something different inside. He was always kind to me, maybe too kind. I didn't notice it at first, but little things started to catch my attention. The hidden meaning behind a word, the way a smile lasted a little too long, or the way his hand on my shoulder stayed longer than necessary. Everything seemed so natural, so ordinary. But what I felt was not ordinary. Because the way he looked at me when he came to our house when he and my mother were lovers made me feel very strange. But I had no right to tell my mother and take away the happiness she had found after so many years. My mom married Jack, and suddenly everything in our lives changed. The first night we moved in, I retreated to my room and stared at my reflection in the mirror for a long time. My long silky hair fell over my shoulders, and my light brown eyes looked dark in the dim light of the room. Oh, my smooth skin was like a fading flower. My skin looked paler than usual, but there was a strange fire inside me. It's just a process of getting used to it, I said to myself. But getting used to it was not as easy as I thought. The house was so big and grand, but there was a kind of silence in it. A silence that was hard to describe. From the outside, everything was perfect, but when you went inside, you could feel that underneath the perfection, something was wrong. When my parents went away on their honeymoon, I was left alone in the house. Actually, it wouldn't be right to say that I was completely alone. A presence that shouldn't be here was felt in every corner. It was a sense of unease in our new life. My mother's marriage to Jack made me feel his presence, and his previous gaze on me in every corner of the house. It was hard to get used to sleeping in another house. My bed was hard. The air in the room was stagnant. Even the curtains felt like they belonged to someone else. The texture of this house was completely foreign. Yet this was my new home. It was supposed to be. I couldn't get comfortable during the night. I left the room and started walking down the hallway. The wooden floor was cool under my bare feet. The thin fabric of my nightgown gently touched my skin, and the light breeze from the window made my shoulders shiver. I took a deep breath and headed for the kitchen. As I drank the water, the strange uneasiness inside me became more pronounced. It was as if someone was watching me. Glancing around the living room, I realized that although everything was in order, it somehow looked wrong. The clock on the wall, the books on the coffee table, the teacup left in the kitchen. Small details. Traces of someone who wasn't here. I slowly put the cup down on the counter and stood in the middle of the living room. At that moment, a very strong feeling came over me. Even though I was the only one in this house, I was not alone. I felt a chill down my back and hugged my shoulders tightly. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it would take time to get used to another home. But even when I closed my eyes, the feeling inside me wouldn't go away. I wasn't sure if I would be able to sleep here tonight. My first day at home was filled with a strange restlessness. I could feel Jack's traces everywhere. I knew he was hovering over me like a shadow that shouldn't be there. But this feeling wasn't just about his presence. I wanted to relax after a long day. I wanted to take a hot shower to quiet my thoughts, to wash away every emotion I thought had entered this strange house. I went into the bathroom. The tiles were cold. I closed the door, checked to see if I had locked it. But what was I guarding against? There was no one in the house but me. Or was there really no one? I turned on the water, took a deep breath as the warm drops slid down my shoulders. I closed my eyes. My muscles relaxed as the warmth soaked into me, but a strange unease began to grow inside me. The drops were like a touch, like a hand on my skin. My breathing became erratic. I slid my hands down my hair, trying to feel the warm water enveloping my body. As I gently soaped myself with my hands, it was as if those hands were not mine. But my mind was already wandering through the dark corridors of the past. I had felt it before. Hands that didn't belong to me hovering over me, touching me with an eerie warmth. The more I tried to forget, the more I remembered. As the steam in the bathroom grew heavier, I felt a pressure building in my chest. I felt the presence of something other than my breath in the hot moisture on the walls. It was the same feeling. I could feel the Jack's breath on my skin that I had felt before, and it felt so strange. I opened my eyes. The bathroom door was still closed, but was it ajar? For a moment, I thought that a pair of eyes were watching me from outside the door. Had I really seen it, or was my mind playing tricks on me? A shiver ran through me. I quickly turned off the faucet, grabbed my towel, and looked in the mirror. My eyes weren't lying to me. I knew I was alone, but Jack's presence was on my skin. Like an invisible force was moving through this house. And the scariest thing, I realized I didn't want to run away from him. Some moments last a lifetime. Sometimes it's a smile, sometimes it's a touch, sometimes it's a shadow. For me, it was that night when a pair of eyes, a breath was on me. Everything was different then. Jake had just entered my mother's life. Our lives were simpler and more ordinary. I don't know why I can't forget that night. Maybe something really happened. Maybe it was all in my imagination. But what I felt was real. When I retired to my room that night, it was stiflingly hot. I opened the window wide and the warm summer night air filtered in and gently licked my skin. Because of the oppressive heat, I was wearing only my underwear, and I couldn't sleep with nothing on. The air was so oppressive that I was suffocating indescribably. My mother was sleeping in the next room with Jake. They were quiet, or so I thought. I had passed out from the sweltering heat and was sleeping like the dead, but suddenly I felt a little shiver. And then, a weight I couldn't describe. A weight I couldn't describe. I felt as if someone was watching me. I tried to open my eyes, but I was in a moment that I couldn't understand whether it was a dream or reality. A dim light was floating in the dark room. The door was slightly ajar. The curtains were fluttering slightly. Then I felt a breath between my legs, as if someone was breathing in and out. I felt light touches on my body and I opened my eyes, startled. And I looked around. There was no one in the room. I think I was dreaming. Then I turned my head and looked towards the door. Did something move in the shadows? I called out to see if a pair of eyes were looking in my direction, but there was no one there. I lay back down on the bed and felt a tingle at the base of my hair. It was a strange feeling. A smell and an indescribable sensation at the same time. As a young girl who had lived alone for years, I wondered if I desired something. I told myself that my brain was playing tricks on me, but the fear wouldn't go away. I got up, looked inside. No one was there. I locked the door to my room and went back to bed. And that night, I couldn't sleep again. Until the morning I thought about what had happened, what I felt. Jake's gaze at breakfast in the morning. Yes, it was the gaze of the owner of the breath between my legs I had seen at night that was watching me. Or my brain was playing tricks on me. I wasn't sure if I should tell my mom that such a nice guy who was madly in love with her was watching me, but what was I gonna say? It wasn't something I could do. Or was it just my imagination? I never knew. But something changed, and I could feel it. There was something different about Jake. After a restless week at home, Mom and Jake finally returned. That day, the moment the door opened, I felt a heaviness inside me, my heart pounding and a tension I couldn't explain to myself taking over my body. My mother was the first to walk through the door. She was smiling like a happy woman returning from vacation. Her eyes were sparkling. As soon as she put her suitcases down, she hugged me. "Clara, I missed you so much, honey," she said. I hugged her back, but my eyes were following Jake, who was standing behind her. He stopped in front of the door, his eyes studying me. I realized he was sighing for a moment, and then unexpectedly he took a step towards me from behind my mother and opened his arms. "Come here, little lady," he said with a slight smile. I hesitated a little. The moment was so unexpected that I instinctively wanted to back away, but my mother's eyes were on us. I had to come closer. I gasped when she put her arms around me. A warmth spread through my chest, but it was suffocating, not comforting. She stroked my back with her hand, as if it was a completely innocent gesture, but I felt her fingertips lingering on my body longer than necessary. The way she kissed my cheek was not normal. I felt both fear and another attraction that I cannot describe. I broke up with him immediately. My mother was happily saying to me at the time, "Clara, it was an incredible vacation. The ocean, the sunset, everything was wonderful. I have so many things to tell you." I could hear her voice, but my main focus was on Jake's presence. That day, my mom and I went into the kitchen to make dinner. Staying busy was the only way to block out the feelings growing inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, my eyes kept drifting to Jake. I felt like he was always watching me from behind, a feeling that both frightened me and gave me indescribable pleasure. When we sat down at the dinner table, Jake was right in front of me. As my mother happily told me about their honeymoon, I realized I hadn't moved the fork in my hand in a while because Jake's eyes were on me. His gaze was even more intense. He looked like he was eating innocently, but his eyes were saying something different. His gaze made me uncomfortable, but it also made me feel a strange attraction. At first I averted my eyes, trying to focus on the food on the plate, but then, unable to avoid feeling his gaze on me, I mustered up the courage to look at him again. Our eyes locked. In that moment, everything froze. His eyes were deep, meaningful, and yet suffocating. It was as if he was leaving a mark on me with his eyes. It was precisely those eyes I saw at the door of my room that night. I wasn't imagining it. My breathing became irregular, my body tensed slightly. I dug my fork into my food so my mother wouldn't notice. But I realized my hand was shaking. At that moment, as my mom got up from the table and went to the kitchen, Jake put his hands on mine and tried to ease my tension. "Are you okay, Claire? Did something happen while we were gone? You look tense." But his touch, the way he held my hand, was not innocent at all. It was like a storm was raging inside me. I quickly pulled my hand out of Jake's grasp, my heart racing. Not knowing what to say, I pushed my chair back slightly and stood up. "I'm fine. I'm just tired," I said hurriedly and headed towards my room, ignoring my mother's curious gaze. I heard Jake sigh quietly behind me, but I didn't look back. I closed my door quickly and leaned back, out of breath. My hands were shaking. That touch, that look. I sat on my bed and tried to pull myself together. What was I doing? Why was I feeling like this? Was this just a misunderstanding? Was Jake really looking at me differently? Or was it all in my head? After a while, my mother's voice came from behind the door. "Clara, are you okay, honey?" "Yes, Mom. I'm just a little sleepy." Even my voice didn't sound like my own. Mom hesitated for a moment, then sighed lightly and walked away. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, but I couldn't sleep. Minutes, maybe hours passed, but I didn't sleep a wink. There was a strange restlessness inside me. Then suddenly, a shadow appeared outside the room. The light from under the door stopped for a moment. It was as if someone was standing in front of my door. I held my breath. I waited a few seconds. Footsteps? No. Silence. Should I have stood up? Should I have opened the door and looked? But I was scared. Was someone really there? Suddenly the shadow disappeared. I felt it speeding away. Was it Jake? I didn't know, but my chest felt tight. My hands were like ice. I couldn't close my eyes until morning. In the morning, I walked into the kitchen as my mom was closing her suitcase. Jake was sipping his coffee, his eyes fixed directly on me. Mom turned with a smile. "Honey, I have to go on a business trip this afternoon. I'll be out of town for a few days." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My eyes involuntarily shifted to Jake. He was watching me too. He was smiling, but he was very relaxed and had a strange look in his eyes. My mom was leaving, and I was left alone with Jake. After my mom left, the house was quiet for a while. At first I was relieved by the silence, but then I realized that the emptiness echoing inside me was making me even more uneasy. Being home alone with Jack felt different with each passing hour. The first day went more smoothly than I expected. Jack was softer, more attentive to me than usual. He made little gestures. When we made coffee in the kitchen, we reached for our cups at the same time, our hands involuntarily touching. As we chatted in the garden, I realized that he was showing me the same kind but distant attitude he normally showed my mother. At first I thought this was a good thing, but I had a strange feeling. I've never looked at him like this before. But now, why does he look different? It's an illusion. I said to myself, but it was getting harder and harder to deny what I felt when I was with her. That day was really beautiful. Jack seemed to be trying to put me at ease. We had breakfast together in the morning, went into town at noon, looked in a few shops, and then came home. The strange thing was this: being alone with him didn't feel as strange as before, but the uneasiness had not completely disappeared. When we went out into the garden in the afternoon, the weather was just right. A warm breeze, pale pink clouds in the sky, and the sound of crickets in the distance. I was lying in my bikini, and everything was perfect. Jack opened a bottle of wine. "You look tense," he said as he filled my glass. "I don't know. Maybe a little tired." I sat on the lounger by the pool, took a small sip of my wine, and for the first time I felt really relaxed. When Jack sat down next to me, there was distance between us, but his gaze stayed on me longer than necessary. "You know," he said, raising his glass to me, "I'm really enjoying my time with you." I raised my glass. "Me too," I said, but my voice had turned into a whisper. The water in the pool glowed faintly in the dark. The peace inside me was replaced by a sweet heaviness. My eyelids involuntarily became heavy. I hadn't slept properly for days, and as the effects of the alcohol washed over me, I started to feel too comfortable. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, I fell asleep. I don't know how much time passed, but something woke me up. A touch. At first I thought it was a light breeze, but then I felt a warm hand on my legs, between my legs, on my skin. When I opened my eyes, I was still at the edge of the pool, but there was movement between my legs. That's when I stopped breathing. Jack. My body contracted involuntarily. My heart was pounding in my chest as I tried to shake off the drowsiness of the wine. When I opened my eyes fully, I saw his head buried in my breasts. His breath was touching my breasts. And he was breathing fast and he looked so happy. I was about to open my mouth and say, "What are you doing?" when Jack looked at me softly and spoke. "Clara, you feel it too, don't you?" His voice was both soft and firm. Instead of backing away, he took a step closer. "I know it's wrong, but..." The moment I felt his hand, his fingertips between my legs, my whole body froze. I thought about this moment many times, but nothing had ever felt so close to the truth. I was screaming inside my brain, "Get up! Get away! This is wrong!" When I opened my eyes, the sun was shining on my face. But there was no warmth inside me. I was on a sun lounger by the pool, and I was only wearing a small towel. Nothing else. And next to me, there was Jack. For a moment I couldn't remember what it was, but then it hit me in the face like a real knife. But at the same time there was another voice whispering inside me, "But you want this." And at that moment, the pressure of Jack's fingers between my legs increased. I gasped for breath. I had to get up. I had to go. But I realized I didn't want to go. My body was burning, my whole body was burning, my desires were stirring. That night I made my decision. I grabbed Jake's head, I grabbed his lips, and we had each other by the pool for hours. Then I passed out from exhaustion. I had really done it. With Jack. My body froze in place. As I remembered that night, I felt a terrible emptiness inside me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. How could I do this? To my mom. A sudden nausea rose up inside me. When I visualized my mother's face, I felt a lump in my throat. For the first time since my father died, she was happy. The first time she had given herself completely to someone. And I had betrayed her in the worst way. My hands started shaking. I quickly got up from the chaise. Jack stirred, opened his eyes. He smiled at me, as if what happened was normal. I couldn't look at him. I ran inside, out of breath. I threw myself into the bathroom and locked the door. I looked in the mirror, but what I saw wasn't me. Who was I? I had a strange flush on my face. There were still traces of his kiss on my lips. I could still feel the jacquard touch all over my body. I brought my hands to my face. I wish I could wipe it all away, but I couldn't. This was the truth. My eyes slowly turned to my reflection in the mirror. This wasn't me. I couldn't undo what happened last night, but what should I do now?
Should I run away? Should I tell? When I entered the living room, even the parquet floor felt cold under my feet. I needed to think, but how could I think? Should I leave this place? Or should I tell my mom everything? That voice echoing inside me was driving me crazy. If you tell her, you'll destroy her world. If you don't, your world will be shattered. Which one was I going to choose? Just then, the door opened. Jack saw me sitting there alone and walked in. His gaze was calm, as if nothing had happened. It made me even madder. "Clara, don't," I said, averting my eyes. But he took a few steps on me. He was so relaxed. "Don't blame yourself so much. You're not the only one who wanted this." His words seemed to cut me to the core. I quickly shook my head from side to side. How could I do this to my mother? The pain inside me was like a knife slicing through my chest. Jack sighed. "I know," he said. "But we both wanted this." I looked at him again, but this time there was no regret in his eyes. I thought about the night, every detail. I had wanted him too, but he was already playing with my body against my will while I slept, and it wasn't the first time. But it didn't change the fact that it was a betrayal of my mother. I had a conscience screaming inside me. What if I tell her? As this thought echoed in my brain, I was suddenly filled with fear. What if I tell her and ruin my mom's world? Because if I told her, it would be over. Jack, my mom, my life. But if I didn't, it would be me. Jack took another step. He wanted to reach out and touch my arm, but I backed away quickly. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice shaking. If she finds out." Jack shook his head from side to side. "He won't find out." I didn't know how to hide it. I had to make a decision before my mom came home, but I didn't know which decision was less destructive. For hours I've been trying to silence the storms swirling inside me, but I kept silent, breathing, thinking, and nothing changed. The guilt was eating me from the inside. The pain and contradiction inside me made it hard for me to even breathe. Was it a mistake? Or had the inevitable happened? For the first time since losing my father, she seemed genuinely happy. She believed in Jack, trusted him. She wanted to make a life with him, and I had destroyed her greatest trust. Living with that reality consumed me. Every time I closed my eyes during the night, I remembered the moments I had spent with Jack. Those moments both frightened me and they were etched deep in my mind in a way I didn't want them to be. Jack was different. He was his usual self, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't stay the same. I couldn't stay in the same house with Jake. He wasn't the man he seemed. Part of me hated him, and part of me wanted him. Could I keep carrying that inside of me? How would I look my mom in the eye when she came back? Every time I looked at her, I knew how much I loved her. But I also knew what I was going through. If I told her, her world would collapse. If I hid it, it would destroy me. So what was the right thing to do? Maybe I need your help. What would you do? Should I keep this secret forever? Or should I tell my mom everything? Please tell me what you think in the comments. I really don't know what is the right thing to do, and perhaps only you can find the answer. If you like my story, please don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next story.